Hello everyone, welcome to the channel Concepts to Grades, where we cover all concepts so that your grades go better. So in this video, we are going to do a complete bio revision. Given that your 10th board exams are almost in a month's time, in this video, we will be doing all the bio chapters that are part of your CBSE class 10th science syllabus. And for people who have decided to start in the last minute, this video will really help you guys, as it will cover all the important topics 1 hour here, and you can easily grab 30 to 40 marks in your exam. Okay, so let's see how we'll cover all the important topics of every chapter. We will cover the CBSE weightage of each chapter and how to study each chapter such that you know what to know or what you will miss in this chapter. This is the most important section. So subscribe to the channel and let's start with the first chapter that we have, which is life processes. This is one of the key chapters with a very heavy concept oriented. So let's see, it has a weightage of 10 to 13 marks, given that there are so many topics that it has to cover. So most repeated topics from this chapter are the photosynthesis equations, digestive enzymes, glucose pathway, double circulation, and urine formation. So it's a very theory chapter. There will be more, you better make notes out of this, and if you have mind maps are easy for you, can do that, or you can prepare flashcards, which really helps you. As a teacher, I would really suggest you guys to make your own notes, because making notes makes you actually study the chapter better, you retain better, you remember better. Similarly, if you feel that it's too late to make notes, you can always join our WhatsApp channel where we share notes. The link for that will be in the description below. And you can also comment below on this video for notes of all these bio chapters, along with a bio sample paper and some diagrams that you need to practice for this chapter. Everything will be available in that PDF. So just comment below and we will share a link for the same. So let's get started with life processes. So first, let us try to understand what are life processes. Well, life processes are any process that help you maintain life. That is all the body functions that determine that you're a living being, that help you carry out your basic activities like your breathing, respiration, digestion, circulating that glucose around your body, and removing the additional waste in your body. Similarly, in plants as well, there are processes which help doing the same. So these kind of processes are called life processes, which help a person or a organism maintain life. Now, let us start with nutrition. Nutrition is the first concept of life processes. So what is nutrition? Nutrition is the transfer of sources of energy. You have different sources of energy. You take all the sources of energy from outside the body to inside of your body. That is called nutrition. You need energy. Ultimately, the goal of the body is, if I want to do anything, even to think or to listen or to do anything, I need energy. So from outside, there are multiple sources of energy. I take that energy source from outside to inside of the body. That part is called nutrition. So in nutrition, there are two types of nutritions. First is autotrophic nutrition. So in autotrophic nutrition, you derive nutrition from inorganic substances like carbon dioxide and water. What is inorganic? Or rather, what is organic? Organic is anything where there's a carbon and hydrogen bond. So in carbon dioxide, there's no carbon, hydrogen. In water, there's no carbon, hydrogen. So there's a inorganic substances like green plants. They use autotrophic nutrition to help them gain energy. Similarly, in heterotrophic nutrition, you use organic substances like carbohydrates, proteins, and all of these complex substances. And then once you take it, you try to break it down into glucose inside your body. That is how you make glucose. So most animals, human beings, we're all heterotrophic, where we depend on autotrophs for our nutrition. Photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the process of autotrophic nutrition that plants use. So here what plants are doing? Plants are taking the carbon dioxide and water from outside into itself and releasing oxygen and glucose. So what are the reactants in this case? They are taking carbon dioxide and water. And what are the products? Oxygen, glucose, and some water is also released. This happens only in the presence of sunlight. So you need sunlight for photosynthesis to occur. The word photo in photosynthesis itself means sun, synthesis means making. Something is making in the presence of sun. So the equation of photosynthesis in this situation would be 6 CO2 plus 12 H2O in the presence of chlorophyll and sunlight gives rise to glucose, which is what is your ultimate energy, carbon dioxide and water. This is a balanced equation, and remembering this equation is highly important. It is one of the most frequently asked questions. So remember this as such, or you can just remember the reactants, products, and since you learn how to balance an equation, you can try to balance it. But since it's a big equation, I would suggest you to remember the balanced equation as such. This equation alone can fetch you 3 marks in some of the questions. And don't forget to write the presence of chlorophyll and sunlight, because without these two, this reaction does not occur. Okay, so you need to remember that. So this is the equation of photosynthesis. Now, what are the steps of photosynthesis? So first step, what happens is the plant absorbs the sunlight. So absorption of light energy by chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the substance which helps the plant absorb some energy. Then there is conversion of light energy into chemical energy by splitting of water into hydrogen and oxygen. So here is the second step, which is very important. So what happens is you convert this light energy and make it into chemical energy, and then you split the water into hydrogen. So in your equation you had H2O, correct? So you split this into hydrogen and oxygen. So you split hydrogen and oxygen. Then this hydrogen in step 3 will combine with the carbon dioxide and form glucose. That is how you are getting C6H12O6. So the water hydrogen is combining with the carbon dioxide and giving you glucose, and this oxygen is released in the case of photosynthesis. So in the equation we had the oxygen being released. So this is how the photosynthesis occurs in 3 steps. Remembering these steps is again important. If you understand these steps, it doesn't really feel like mug up. The next part is chlorophyll. Now, how is this chlorophyll helping? Where is it present? So if this is your leaf, if you have a leaf like this, and I cut the leaf in this fashion, and I see it from here, like I cut a slice like this, and I see it from here, which is called the transverse section of the leaf, it will look something like this. So the upper layer of the leaf, as you can see, has chloroplast, which has chlorophyll. So inside a chloroplast cell, there are chlorophylls. So inside the chloroplast, we have chlorophyll cells which help in absorption of sunlight. Chlorophyll by nature absorbs sunlight. It's a chemical such that it can absorb sunlight, right? So it is present in the upper layer of leaf and it helps in absorbing the sunlight. Now, the plants also have to exchange these gases, right? How is it taking the carbon dioxide, sending the oxygen out and all of that? So for that, there is stomata. So what happens here is, stomata is present in the lower layer of the leaf. As you can see here, there is stomata present. So behind the leaf, there is stomata present. And this stomata opens and closes by the help of these cells on the end, which are called guard cells. And inside the guard cells, there is water. Okay, so water inside these guard cells determines the opening and closing of stomata. So if there is no water, if it is shrunk, it gets closed. And if there is filled with water, it gets opened. So this is what happens in case of guard cells. So guard cells do not determine the closing and opening of water. The water content in the guard cells determines the opening and closing of stomata. Always remember, it's the water content inside the guard cells. Now we'll move towards heterotrophic nutrition, where we will learn different types of heterotrophic nutrition. One is called saprotrophic nutrition and the other is a parasitic nutrition. So here in saprotrophic nutrition, organisms derive nutrition from dead and decaying matter. Like once it's done, there's nothing to do in it, still they can find nutrition in it. So all organisms like ants, cockroaches and earthworms, all of these are saprotrophics, where they can again put them back into the soil. So in parasitic nutrition, they derive nutrition from the organism without killing it. It's like even if you're a vegetarian and you eat plants, you have already killed the plant in some or the other form because you've plucked it out of its roots. It's not living anymore for you to eat it. But in parasitic nutrition, without killing the organism, you start deriving nutrition from it. Like the lice in your hair, leeches, So all of these things happen because of parasitic nutrition. So now let's move to the most important part of this nutrition section, which is the human digestive system. So our human digestive system is it is designed to do the following process in the sequence. First is ingestion, where it takes in the food. Next is digestion, where you try to digest the food. Absorption, which is absorbing the food into the bloodstream. Assimilation is absorbing the glucose in the bloodstream by different organs and cells. And egestion is removing the waste materials from the body. So if you look at the human digestive system, first we have a mouth here, okay? Then inside the mouth there's a tongue and there are some teeth and all. And this is the esophagus, which is also called as the food pipe. Then it bulges into stomach. Then we have the liver and the gallbladder. Then there is small intestine and large intestine. These are the different body parts that we have. Let us look at the function of each of them very clearly. So the first one is the mouth. So inside the mouth, what happens is with the teeth, we start chewing the food. So and when you start chewing the food, there is saliva secreted in your mouth. So the teeth crush the food into smaller particles, the tongue moves it here and there, and the saliva wets the food. And there is an enzyme in saliva called salivary amylase. Again, all the underlined enzymes are very important and their functions are very important. So the saliva wets the food, the salivary amylase in the saliva converts starch into simple sugars. Whatever we eat like rice, etc. is all starch. So you have to convert first starch into simple sugars. So that is done by salivary amylase in the mouth. So once it's done and you swallow your food, it goes into the esophagus, which is also called the food pipe. Okay, and here the food moves through the esophagus due to peristaltic movements. Peristaltic movements are the movements that help. You can't rely on gravity always, right, for food to go down. So that movements are rhythmic contractions inside the esophagus which help it move downwards, right? Sometimes if you eat something very hard without much water, you need the peristaltic movements to push it down. Then comes the stomach, where most digestion occurs. So in stomach, there are some enzymes and some acids released which help us digest. So first is pepsin, which digests protein. Then we have hydrochloric acid, which makes the food acidic for pepsin to act. So for pepsin to act, hydrochloric acid has to be released. So that is why in our stomach there is acidity, because the acid is released whenever you're hungry, so that pepsin is ready to act as soon as food comes in. And if you don't eat food by then, the acid is already in the stomach, which is causing more. Then there is a mucus which protects the stomach lining from this hydrochloric acid, because the pH of this acid is almost scale of 1, which is like very acidic. It's like it can burn anything. So this mucus layer protects the stomach from this hydrochloric acid. And it is necessary because without this hydrochloric acid, pepsin can't act. So pepsin digests protein. And an easy way to remember all the enzymes is anything that ends with this SIN in will digest anything related to protein. Next comes the liver. Now the liver secretes bile juice, which makes the medium alkaline, because for pancreas to act next digestion is done by pancreas. For pancreas to digest, you need to make the medium alkaline. So for that you use bile, because previously you made it acidic by the use of hydrochloric acid for pepsin. So now bile will make it alkaline, and second, it emulsifies fats. What is emulsifying fats is, now fats don't mix with water, right? They'll be floating. You know this thing which you use to make buttermilk, which you keep mixing and then it just merges the curd with the water so that you can have a glass of buttermilk. Bile exactly does that. It churns the entire digestion system so that the fats are part of this and not floating on the top, so that the next enzyme can act and digest it. So bile is not digesting anything. Bile is just making the medium alkaline, and it is also emulsifying fats to help with further digestion. And this bile is stored inside the gallbladder. Now comes this pancreas. In pancreas, there is trypsin. Again, anything with SIN digests protein. So trypsin digests the protein, which needs an alkaline medium done by the bile. Lipase digests these emulsified fats. So if bile doesn't act, lipase can't act. So bile has to emulsify fats, then lipase will digest the emulsified fats. Now you might wonder that pancreas releases insulin. From where is that coming? That is not responsible. Okay. These are enzymes which digest the food we eat. Insulin is a hormone. It regulates the blood sugar glucose. So here you've not yet made any glucose yet. So there is no role of insulin as such. So these are enzymes, that is a hormone. It's a completely different thing. So once glucose is made, then that insulin hormone is released. We have not yet made glucose. So pancreas has two roles. It is also part of digestion, and it is also an endocrine gland which releases a hormone. Now comes the small intestine. In small intestine is where now you have digested it. You have to complete the little bit digestion and then you have to absorb it. So the intestine has a juice which converts all the carbohydrates into glucose, proteins into amino acids, and fats into fatty acids, because this is what your body can absorb. You have chosen to be heterotrophic and eat whatever you want, so it has to be broken down into the form which can be absorbed. So you have broken down with the help of stomach, liver, and pancreas. So the next step is to convert it into glucose, proteins into amino acids, fats into fatty acids. And then comes the villi. Now villi are present on the inner lining of the intestine, and they are like this. They are the structure which look like this with tangles on the top, so that the surface area is increased. So if something is straight, it will only flow like this, but if it is like this, it will flow like this. Correct? So that is how you have increased the surface area of absorption, and there are a lot of blood vessels inside this villi. So as soon as something comes on the surface, it gets absorbed into the villi. Okay, so this is the villi which is present inside the inner lining of the small intestine, purely made for absorption. Now once you have absorbed all the glucose, fatty acids, etc., the next left thing is water, which is absorbed by the large intestine. So the large intestine absorbs the entire water, and when you have a diarrhea where you're having loose motions, there's no water absorption taking place, there is infection in your large intestine. That is why it is not happening. And then once the water is absorbed, which usually depends on how much water is present in the body, the anus excretes the unwanted food or unabsorbed food as feces. And this is how the entire human body digestive system works. You need to remember all the enzymes and their functions and what it digests. Now moving to respiration. Now why is this necessary? You have absorbed glucose so far, correct? You haven't made energy. You need to make energy. How will you make energy? Now this glucose is there in your villi. Your villi has absorbed all the glucose, right? So now how will every cell make energy is, this glucose from villi goes to, now it's absorbed, it will be in part of your arteries or veins, and then it will mostly be part of arteries, and then it will go to the cell. In the cell's cytoplasm, which is like outside the nucleus here, it converts the glucose into pyruvate. And this pyruvate, further to gain energy, it has to become energy depends on how much oxygen is present in the cell. So if there is oxygen there is a good oxygen presence, then it is called aerobic respiration, where it gives a good amount of energy. Suppose there is less or no oxygen, then it's called anaerobic respiration, and it gives out energy. Ultimately it will get its energy, but it will be very less compared to the energy that comes from aerobic respiration, which is in the presence of oxygen. So let us look at what happens in each of the case. So first the glucose became pyruvate, and then it is waiting. If oxygen is there, I'll become more energy. If oxygen is not there, I'll do less energy. So in anaerobic respiration, let's say there is pyruvate. So glucose is a 6 carbon molecule, right? Which is C6H12, so 6 carbon. Pyruvate is a 3 carbon molecule. I have made it, it's only 3 carbons, you can see here, right? So it's a 3 carbon molecule. What happens is, in the presence of anaerobic, now let us take first case where there is absence of oxygen. There is no oxygen at all. Okay, this usually happens in the case of yeast. What it does is, it divides itself into ethanol, carbon dioxide, and some energy. So ethanol is a 2 carbon molecule, we can see here, right? It becomes ethanol, carbon dioxide, and energy. Now this process is also called fermentation. Okay, and it is mostly used to give, because there's so much carbon dioxide that is released, it is used to ferment, mostly in the cases of liquor making or in the cases of bread and all of this, where you need those carbon dioxide things to make the substance rise, you use yeast over there. Now let's say there is lack of oxygen. Lack of oxygen is something like oxygen is not as much as it's needed. It's less than what is needed, which usually happens in our muscle cells. There is lactic acid generated, which is again like a 3-carbon molecule, and you have some energy released. This happens in our muscle cells if you are staying in the same place for long, and when you suddenly lift your leg, starts getting cramps. That is because of there is less oxygen over there. Oxygen hasn't reached there, but you're trying to move it, so it's trying to get some energy somehow, so it starts breathing in this lack of oxygen mode, and that lactic acid is released inside the muscle, which causes that pain. Now, which happens regularly, which is the aerobic respiration. So let's say we have good amount of oxygen. So the presence of oxygen, which happens in the mitochondria of cell. We have learned in class 9 that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. So if there is oxygen from the cytoplasm, the pyruvate goes off into the mitochondria where the respiration can occur. So it then becomes water, carbon dioxide, and lot of energy. So the energy generated in this is much higher than compared to the other processes of respiration. So you have water, carbon dioxide, and energy. Now you should remember these pathways, the whole flow chart, so that you can get full marks in this section. This is one of the most repeated sections of CBSE board. Till now we have seen how important oxygen is to get energy. Ultimately the goal was to get energy. So to get energy, we need oxygen. Now how does our human body gather this oxygen is very important. So how our human body gathers this oxygen is through this respiratory system that is present in our body. And let us see how the respiratory system works. So from the nose, the air enters into the body. You do the breathing and the air enters into your body. And when that happens, as we breathe through the nose, it is filtered by the tiny hair that is present in our nose to eliminate the dust that is present outside. And from there, it passes through the trachea and the bronchioles, or which is together called the both the lungs. Now, this trachea has rings of cartilage. You can see these rings of cartilage that it has. This prevents it from collapsing. So, these rings of cartilage on the trachea prevent it from collapsing. Not when you're inhaling, anyways, it is full. But when you're exhaling, let's say it's pressed, it shouldn't collapse. So, for that reason, there are rings of cartilage. So, once this happens, what happens is it goes into the lungs. And then at the end of the lung, there is an alveoli structure. This structure of alveoli, what it does is it helps with oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange. So once the air comes in, there is oxygen in the air and the blood has carbon dioxide. Correct? Because when every cell after it breathes, it releases carbon dioxide, right? We saw that water, carbon dioxide, and energy is released. So that water will go into the kidney system for excretion, but this carbon dioxide will come here. So what it does is it refills this carbon dioxide, goes back in, and this oxygen enters into the bloodstream. So this alveoli are very thin walled. The thickness here is like 0.8 mm or something. So it's so thin that with simple diffusion, the oxygen can go here and the carbon dioxide can go into back into the alveoli. And then you exhale the carbon dioxide out once you have transferred the oxygen in the air into your bloodstream. So this alveoli helps in exchange of gases through diffusion. Now, this diffusion alone might not be completely enough for your body to carry the entire oxygen. So what happens is in our body, to carry this oxygen to every cell, there is a transport system which is mostly done with the help of blood. So your blood is helping you transport everything from one place to another. The villi glucose from there to every cell coming through blood. The oxygen from the lungs to every cell coming through blood. So this blood in our body consists of red blood cells, white blood cells suspended in a system called plasma. So if you centrifuge blood, you can see that down layer. This is all red blood cells. Okay. And this is plasma in which everything is suspended. Now, why is this red blood cells red? Is because there's a presence of hemoglobin inside this red blood cells, which is a red pigment, and this hemoglobin has high affinity for oxygen. So it sees oxygen, it grabs oxygen. So this helps in absorbing oxygen much faster than just through simple diffusion. Okay, so it helps in transport of all food, carbon dioxide waste, nitrogenous waste, help in transport of oxygen and all of those things from our body. Now, how is this blood carried through from one place to another? You need pipes, right, for it to go. So these pipes in our body form the circulatory system, and you can't rely on gravity alone for all the transportation to occur. So you need, like, let's say your water head is on top, you need the water to go up. Can't rely on the sump which is down or beside your house. You need to go to the overhead tank as well. Like, the body has to send blood even to the upper body. Can't rely only on the lower body. So for that reason, there is a heart which pumps the blood to upper body and pumps the blood to the lower body, collects the blood, helps the body transport, like creates that pressure for transporting everything, and it is transported through the arteries and veins and all of them. So let us look at what are these. So first we have these arteries, which are usually coded in red color, and they are also in red color. These vessels carry oxygenated blood from the heart to all parts of the body, and they have thick walls because the blood from the heart comes at a very high pressure. So to prevent that breakage from pressure, it has a very thick wall. And veins are the blood that carry deoxygenated blood from all parts of the body to the veins. It's very 8th class to say pure blood and impure blood. You're in class 10th, you have to use the words oxygenated, deoxygenated blood, because ultimately it's that there is no pure, impure blood. Oxygenated blood is carried by arteries, deoxygenated blood is carried by veins. And these veins have valves to prevent the blood from flowing backwards. It has come from the cell, so I've already taken all the unnecessary things from the cell, so it prevents it from going back to the cell so that it can get oxygenated back at the heart. Now at the cell level, these capillaries are formed, which are like web structure that you see here, so that the exchange of gases take place. They are very thin, very thin, 1 meter thick blood vessels. So same like how the alveoli blood transfusion takes place, same way this capillary will come in contact with the cell. The cell will give out its carbon dioxide, take the oxygen from the capillary, and then it becomes veins and it goes up. So it is, at the end, it's all a one continuous system. This is the human body heart, so which is the pump organ, or which helps in pumping the blood from one place to another. Heart does not purify blood. Let's put it out there. Heart doesn't purify blood. Heart just gives and throws. That is all what heart does. The purification of blood happens in the lungs. Purification, as in here, oxygenation of blood, happens in the lungs. Heart's function is to just pump the blood. So how the heart does is, heart has 4 chambers here. The upper ones are called atrium. So this is the right atrium. This is the right ventricle. Okay, this is the left atrium, and this is the left ventricle. Now here there is this big vein that you see, this long vein. This is called vena cava. The upper one is called superior vena cava. The below one is called inferior vena cava. It is basically the major vein that collects all the blood from all the veins. And then the one with the 3 lines is called aorta, which is the biggest artery and takes all the artery blood from the heart to go into different cells of the body. This one here is called the pulmonary artery. You might be wondering, why is it artery given it's blue? Basically, pulmonary artery, I'll come back to that. And this one here is called the pulmonary vein. So this pulmonary artery and pulmonary vein are the only 2 artery and veins which carry the blood opposite to their nature. That is, pulmonary artery carries impure blood or deoxygenated blood, and pulmonary vein carries the oxygenated blood. This is because they go to the lungs for the oxygenation of this blood. So that is why it is called opposite, and anything pulmonary goes to the lungs, correct? So the pulmonary vein and pulmonary artery goes to the lungs, takes the blood, purifies, becomes the pulmonary vein and comes back. So we'll see how this circulation occurs in the human body. So first, the circulation of heart starts with all parts of the body are there. From all parts of the body, the deoxygenated blood is collected by the veins and it comes into the vena cava. From the vena cava, it goes into the right atrium. From the right atrium, it contracts. The atrium contracts and goes into the left ventricle. Once it goes to the left ventricle, it is pushed out by the pulmonary artery. Once it's pushed out by the pulmonary artery, it goes to the lungs, gets oxygenated, and becomes the pulmonary vein. You know, like capillaries, artery to vein, same concept, becomes the pulmonary vein, and then brings the blood back into the left atrium that you see here. Once the left atrium is contracted, it goes into the left ventricle, and then that is pushed out to the aorta, which pushes the blood to all parts of the body. Heart is only taking the blood, pumping, sending out, taking, sending it out. That's all. Doesn't purify. The purification or oxygenation happens at the lungs. So this contraction of heart, the both atrium actually contracted once, both ventricle contracted once. That is how you are seeing the heart happening. So one side, if it is taking from vena cava, one side it is sending out through aorta as well. So this, every blood cycle, every blood that comes into the heart twice. First it comes to the right atrium, then goes to pulmonary vein. Again it gets oxygenated and comes back and comes on the left side. So since it comes twice into the heart, it is called double circulation. The heart gets circulated in the human or heart twice, because it is double circulated. And this happens because we want to separate the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. We do not want them to mix. Why? Because we are need of higher body temperature. We need that separation. So blood undergoes circulation twice, where the oxygenation and deoxygenated blood are separated, and this occurs in warm-blooded organisms like human beings, where the body temperature is maintained. And it is essential for us to maintain the body temperature, as we need to do some functions with such temperature. Something called as single circulation also occurs in case of fishes, etc., where there are only 2-chambered hearts or 3-chambered hearts, where the blood only goes through the body once, and there is no body temperature maintenance over there, and they are cold-blooded organisms. This difference is something that is asked every year, so you need to understand this clearly. Now, apart from the blood transportation, there's another system in our body, which is called the lymphatic system, which transports lymph across the body. So lymph is nothing but plasma, protein, and blood cells which have escaped into that intercellular spaces. So anything that escapes is transported through lymph. So basically it's like a fat fluid that, or tissue fluid that travels back into the blood. It carries absorbed fat. So that is why there is this lymphatic drainage massages for fat loss. So basically it is a fluid that carries digested and unabsorbed fat from the small intestine, and it takes it across different bodies. So you drain it accordingly, such that there is no fat stored at that particular site. Coming to transportation in plants. So plants also need a transportation system, because they need water and all of these things, and how do they transport it up, down, etc. So for that they have two vascular vessels called xylem and phloem, where xylem helps with the transport of water and phloem helps with the transport of soluble products of photosynthesis. Okay, so photosynthesis transport occurs through phloem, and xylem helps with transport of water. So if this is a plant, how does transportation of water occur is, so the roots that you see here absorb water from the soil. So they take up ions and create a water channel through the xylem tube that is present in the stem. Now this alone will not be enough for pushing this water upward. It has to go against gravity up to the, this is a small plant, but big trees also need water. So what plants does is, they lose water through their leaves, through stomata, and the form of water vapor, and this is called transpiration. So when they lose water from there, that outwardness of water creates a pull for water to go back and replace the water that is lost. So the transpiration helps in creating an upward pull through the xylem vessel for the transport of water. This is how plants transport water in their system. So it's like a trade-off. You lose some water so that you can get more water through the xylem. More water is absorbed. That is how transportation occurs of water. In the case of food, same transport of soluble products of photosynthesis is actually called translocation. Okay, and this occurs in the case of phloem. What happens is, this happens with the help of sieve tubes and companion cells. So inside the phloem there are sieve tubes and companion cells which contract and release to help open the upward and downward direction of food. So what happens is they use osmotic pressure to transport food where it is needed. So you create an osmotic pressure. So let's say in spring season you need more food near the fruits and flowers. So it creates a pressure over there which transports this using the sieve tube to that particular site. Right? So now we have eaten food, we have made it glucose, from glucose we made it energy, and then we have transported all this across the body. The last thing left is taking out the unnecessary substances from our body. So how do we do that? Is through excretion. We excrete everything in our body with the help of the excretory system that is present. So we have a pair of kidneys in our body which help with this process. So there is kidney, this is the renal artery, renal vein, this is the urinary bladder, this is called the urinary tract, this is the urethra, right? And each of this kidney contains a nephron, which is the functional unit of filtration, which is like a capillary structure, again very thin walled, transfer through diffusion. That is the normal process that occurs. So what happens inside the case of nephron is, so if you see the first part, so the blood from the renal artery comes into this is called the Bowman's capsule, which collects the initial filtrate. It is like how you strain your tea, it just is collecting the initial filtrate of the blood and passing it through the nephron tube, where again here there are blood vessels which are taking back anything which shouldn't have been filtered, like water, salts, amino acids, glucose excess. If it is there, it gets reabsorbed by the renal vein, which absorbs it and takes it back for oxygenation and transportation. And then how much of the water gets absorbed is depending on how much water is there in the human body. Once this has happened, all of the excreted amino acids etc. flow through the collecting duct, and all these collecting ducts pass through the ureter to reach the urinary bladder where it is stored. So from all collecting duct, it passes through the ureter, reaches the urinary bladder where it is stored, and urinary bladder is in the muscle control. So it expands and it creates an urge to pass it through the urethra, and once that urge is cleared, you go and clear your urine from the urinary bladder. So this is how excretory system works in human beings. In plants, the excretion occurs through multiple ways. So one is oxygen, water, carbon dioxide, all of them are released through different situations as per photosynthesis, during respiration, etc. They also excrete dead cells and waste products in the form of leaves when the leaves fall off. They release some of them into the soil through surrounding soil through roots. And some resins and gums are also waste products which are stored in the bark of the trees and they are excreted from the bark. So we use that resin, gum and everything to make our rubber, etc. So this is how it is excreted. This completes the chapter life processes. It's a big chapter, lot to consume. But since we are doing a bio revision, we'll go ahead with the next chapter, control and coordination chapter. So in this chapter, what we have left out over there of all the body parts, we have left the human brain out and some endocrine glands. We'll be covering that along with some reflex actions and some coordination in plants as well. So this chapter usually comes for 3 to 5 marks. Most important topics would be reflex action, reflex path, the brain parts, hormones and tropisms. It's a more MCQ style kind of a chapter where you can make multiple mind maps and flashcards to remember this. So let's start with understanding what's a response, what's a stimuli. So response and stimuli is basically you give a trigger and then you have a reaction for it. It is the action-reaction concept. So the action would be the stimuli and response would be the reaction. So if I pinch my hand, it will pain. Since I'm pinching, I'm not reacting. But if someone else pinches it, I will react to it. Because I'm like, what is this suddenly that has happened? So every time there is a stimuli, it's a trigger or the first move, there is a response for it. So that reaction to the stimulus is response. Now, how do you carry that? How do you know that there is someone pinching your hand? How is that stimuli going? So that happens because of some receptors that are present in front of our sensory organs. So all our sensory organs have these receptors which take these stimuli, which help us cause the reaction. So Receptors help gather this information about the stimuli to create the response. So it is present in our ears, skin, eyes, tongue, and nose. So all the five senses, they have these respective sense organs. So what are they called? Eyes are called photoreceptors. So they are sensitive to light. Nose has olfactory receptors. They sense any smell. Tongue has gustatory receptors, so you can know the taste. And ears have phonoreceptors, so they can sense any sensitivity in the sound vibrations. And the skin has tactile or pressure receptors, so it can feel any pressure that has changed. So these receptors help in gathering the information about what is the stimuli. So once we know this, now this receptor information has to be transported through our body for you to produce a response. So how is that done is because of the help of our nervous system that is present, which has the brain, the spinal cord, and all the nerves in our body, which gather this information, send it to one control center, which says, okay, this is me pressing on my hand, so you don't have to react much right now. You are aware of this, so you don't react. So all of this communication occurs through the nerve system or the nervous system. So the functional unit of this system is a neuron. So this cell has different parts. So these ends are called dendrites. So the end of this dendrite is where there are receptors which gather information. This is the nucleus of the cell. And then you have the cell body. And this long part here is called the axon. And in some cases it is covered with myelin sheath, which is the cell on top, and this is the nerve ending. This network of neurons, spinal cord, brain become our nervous system. So let us see how the neuron transmission takes place. So what happens is there is a chemical signal at the end of the neuron. So once it's a chemical signal at the end, it gathers that information, becomes an electric signal and passes through the neuron. Once it reaches the nerve ending, what happens is it is not connected end to end. There is no connection between the two neurons. This gap is called the synapse. And this synapse, again, what happens? The electric signal becomes a chemical signal and it is sent to the next neuron with the help of neurotransmitters, which reach the next neuron, again becomes an electric signal and passes through the next neuron. Again, the same process repeats. Now, neuron, this is how we've understood that neuron transmit the information. Now, ultimately, let us try to see how the action is generated. Now, the first kind of action that we see, like we've seen the stimulus, we've seen how the stimulus has come from receptors, we've seen how it is being transmitted. Now, I have to create an action. So, there are multiple actions that you can make. The first action is a reflex action that you make. That reflex action is when someone tries to hit you something hard and you, without even thinking, you immediately turn. That is a reflex action. It's like someone comes and gives you a tupply, you're like, who did it? That is a reflex action. You wouldn't have thought what happened. So these kind of reflex action are controlled by the spinal cord in our body. The information doesn't go to the brain. That is why you do it without thinking. There's no thinking involved. Like you touch a hot thing, you remove your hand immediately and then you realize it's hot. After touching and removing your hand, you think it's hot because by then the brain would have reacted. But these reactions, which are reflex, which are there to protect your body from, any harm that can happen, is why it is called a reflex action. Like when you prick something on your hand, you immediately retract. That is because of a reflex action. So in a reflex action, what happens is, let's say you have touched a hot object here. It is going through the receptor, and then there is a sensory neuron which carries this information across. It goes to the spinal cord. There is a relay neuron here, okay, and that sends it back through the reflex neuron or the muscular neuron back to the muscle, telling it to retract your hand back. So this is a reflex action. So it is an immediate response to the stimulus without involvement of brain or thinking, right? And the path that is followed, that is heat, receptor, sensory neuron, relay neuron, then muscle neuron, and then to the muscle, is called the reflex arc, or the path that is followed during the reflex action is called the reflex arc, correct? So the path that it generally follows is called the reflex arc. In some situation, you might be given a situation where you have to do a reflex action and they'll be asking you what is the path followed. You have to mention these things, that stimulus, then receptor, then the sensory neuron, then the relay neuron, then the effector neuron or the muscle neuron, and then to the effector or the muscle. You have to write this path to show the reflex arc path. Now there are other type of actions which are body followers, which are called voluntary actions and involuntary actions. So voluntary actions are the actions which are controlled by us, like walking, running, eating. I want to walk now, so I'm walking. I want to run, I'm running. I want to move the hand, I'm moving. I'm controlling this hand movement. How I want to move, I'm moving. But while this is happening, I'm doing something which is not in my control, or I don't know that I'm doing. Like I'm breathing, my heart is beating, my eyes are blinking. These things are happening without me telling myself that, okay, blink now, okay, blink now. It's not like that. It just happens on its own. So these actions which are not controlled by us are called the involuntary actions. And that is like I said, the heartbeat, the blinking, the breathing, they are all involuntary actions. Voluntary actions are controlled by us. Now, since these actions are like the bigger part of the actions that our body has to carry, it involves the brain or the human brain. So let's see how the brain carries out these actions. So the human brain in our body is present inside a skull, which is called the cranium. Cranium, which is present inside our skull. From the cranium and the brain, in between there is cerebrospinal fluid, which protects the brain from shock absorption. It's a fluid-like structure which prevents it from shock absorption. So there is cerebrospinal fluid, then there is cranium, which is the hard part of the skull. Inside that there is a human brain. So now let us see the parts of the brain and which part does what kind of function. So the brain is divided into three parts. The first part is the forebrain. So whatever you see shaded in green is the forebrain, or the cerebrum of the human body, which is the largest part of the brain, and it has regions of sensory parts for each part. So the eyes have one part, the nose has one part, the ears have a part, and all of that. So this cerebrum is mainly responsible for thinking, intelligence, and all the voluntary actions that you do. The walking, running, everything happens through the forebrain. Now coming to the midbrain, which is the middle part. Again, the green shaded part is what I'm trying to tell. It is the midbrain, which is the middle part of the brain, and the function of this part is it controls the involuntary actions that head, eyes, ears have to respond to stimuli. Like something like when someone calls your name, you turn. Like when someone says Gayatri, I turn. That's my name. I turn. I don't realize much, but I turn because that is the action of the middle part of the, it's an involuntary action. Someone gives you a stimuli and the response to it is your turning. Like someone pulls you stimuli, it is not a reflex action. You take time, but you turn. Your brain is thinking because you have to process whose name has been called. It is not a reflex. Any name you won't turn. You will call only when your name is responded. So in that situation, the midbrain is used. Coming to the hindbrain or the last part of the brain, it contains pons, which is this part, the cerebellum, and the medulla oblongata. So these are the three parts. So this is the pons, this is the medulla oblongata, and this is the cerebellum. So they are the three parts of the brain. So they accordingly perform this balance. Like cerebellum is responsible for your body posture and balance. So you stay straight and you don't bend much is because of the cerebellum. The pons, which is here, connects all the brain parts. Like it helps the brain talk to each other parts. Like the cerebrum talking to the midbrain to the hindbrain happens in the case of pons. Like someone says, Gayatri, come here. So the Gayatri is when I respond, that is the midbrain part. Coming here, getting up and walking is the front brain part or the forebrain part. So the pons helps in connecting these two actions at once. Now the medulla oblongata controls all our involuntary actions like blinking, breathing, heartbeat, etc. So it's controlled by the medulla oblongata. So these are the brain parts and what human brain does accordingly. So we'll now move to chemical coordination where let's say you have to send a signal to the entire body at once. The coordination has to happen entire body at once. So when you rely on the brain for such coordination, It takes a lot of time to regulate the entire body at once, because as we've seen, the neuron transmission takes so much of time. It usually doesn't, but still we need much quicker response and we need to coordinate with the entire body. So in that situation, human beings do a chemical coordination where a chemical is released in the bloodstream, which immediately creates a response in entire body. So to provide that, we have an endocrine system or endocrine glands which release hormones which help us in this chemical coordination. So these are the below endocrine glands that are present, their location, the hormone and its function. So starting with the hypothalamus gland that is present, it is present behind the brain, and it is releases a releasing hormone which controls all other endocrine glands. Coming to the next one, which is a pituitary gland, it is present below the midbrain and it releases a growth hormone. So that causes the height and growth of the person, where the entire body elongates and grows. So any deficiency or superficiency or increase in this hormone causes the variation in height. Coming to thyroid gland is present near the throat. Okay, it is present here near the throat on the trachea. Okay, and this releases the hormone called thyroxine, which is responsible for the metabolism of the body. So it is completely regulated by the thyroid gland, and availability of iodine in the body is essential for thyroxine to be produced. The iodine helps in production of the thyroxine hormone. If the person has iodine deficiency, they develop a disease called goiter, which has a swollen neck as its symptom. And this is the reason why in India, the salt is iodized by law to help people get the required iodine for thyroxine production. The next gland we have are pancreas, which are present in the abdomen, and they release insulin. This regulates the blood sugar levels in the body. The trypsin and lipase, which is released by pancreas in the digestive system, are enzymes, which is ultimately different from this insulin. Insulin is a hormone which releases the blood sugar levels, whereas those enzymes help in digestion of protein and fats. Okay, so once the glucose is absorbed to regulate the sugar levels in the body, insulin is produced. So next is the adrenaline gland, which is present above the kidneys, and it releases adrenaline, which regulates your emotions, fight and flight mode. Like you get angry, start crying, you want to fight, or you want to run away. All these things, emotions, are done with the help of adrenaline gland, which is present above the kidneys. The next two endocrine glands are present in either males or females. So the males have testis, which is an endocrine gland, and it is present in the scrotum outside the body. It releases testosterone, which develops the male sex organ and its characteristics, like all those male features, the beard, the hair on the body, all of those things are with the help of testosterone, which is produced inside the testis gland, which is present in males. In females, there is ovary. It is present behind the intestine, below the kidneys. So here estrogen is produced, which helps in same female sex organs and its characteristics, like how I'm a girl. Why am I a girl? I'm not growing beard, my voice is thin. It's all because where estrogen is produced. I have periods coming. All of those things happen because of the estrogen that happens in our body. So these are the different hormones that are released in our body to regulate certain functions, which have to be done through the body. Now coming to the next one, which is coordination in plants. Now in plants, coordination happens, or movement or change happens in two cases. One is independent of growth. It just moves. There's no growth that is causing because of this stimulus or response. Second one is dependent on growth. So in the first case is like you give a stimulus, it just moves. It doesn't cause any growth in the plant. So that happens in the case of touch me not plant. You touch, it closes. It's not moving. And it does it with the help of water in the stomata and all of that. Like it changes the water content to cause the movement. Independent of growth, what happens is there is some stimulus and the plant starts growing. Like here in this case, you can see how this plant is growing in the direction of sun. In the need of sun, it is going down, but for sun, it moved out and started growing up. So these are dependent on growth. So the growth dependent response is called tropism. So there are different type of tropism in plants. So the first one is phototropism, which is moving in the direction of light. It usually occurs on the tip of the plant. Like wherever light is, it starts growing in that direction. Second one is hydrotropism, which is moving in direction of water. You can see that in the roots. Like here, because the water is on this end, the roots started moving towards the water. Next one is geotropism, which is moving towards gravity. That is the roots, like if you tilt the pot, it will still go down towards gravity, right? Those are the roots. Next is chemotropism, or some chemicals causing the movement. So when the pollen grain reaches on top of the stigma, it goes through in this direction. It's moving in one weird shape. That is because of the chemicals that are present, so that the pollen reaches the ovule inside the ovary. So this is one kind of movement. So these are the different kinds of tropisms that occur in plants. Then comes chemical coordination in plants. So in plants also you need hormones to promote growth. It cannot do everything with the help of this one. It doesn't even have a brain, to be precise. So the hormones that help in growth of plants are auxin, which is present on the tip of the shoot, where the growth of the shoot, and it also helps with phototropism. Auxin is that hormone which helps in growth of the shoot, or the phototropism at the tip of the shoot. Cytokinins is present in fruits and flowers, which promotes cell division. There is more and more cell division. Gibberellins is present in the stem of the plant, which promotes cell elongation. So this one elongates itself to grow tall trees. And abscisic acid gives rise to whittled leaves. It's present inside the whittled leaves which are fallen, because it inhibits growth. It stops the growth of the plants. So this has officially completed our next chapter, coordination, control and coordination. So we will now move to the next big chapter that we have, which is how do organisms reproduce. Now again, this chapter has a weightage of 8 to 10 marks, and it is a big chapter. It is mostly asked questions are in asexual reproduction, the stability of DNA, sexual reproduction in plants and humans, and little bit of reproductive health. In this chapter, you will get maximum theory questions, because it is a very theory based chapter. So you can, I'm emphasizing on writing your own notes, but if you need notes, you can always comment below and we will provide you the notes with the keywords and all of those things. And you should always remember to underline keywords in this chapter, because there will be many keywords as they come. So let us start with how do organisms reproduce, starting with why are organisms reproducing in the first place? Why do you want to do this process? It is not a life essential process, right? You don't need to do it to maintain life. It's just an extension. So it is more of a society concept. You want your species to continue that, and you don't want it to become extinct. You don't want you to end with yourself. You want the next generation to carry on. That is why you start reproducing. And there is also one more thing called creating variation in the species to help the next generation survive in the changing environment. For example, in my generation, having a phone, a laptop, everything started when I was in 10th class, to be very precise. But for my son, he's already born with his parents using a phone, a laptop, an iPad, and a lot of other things. So gadgets is part of his life. So he is the generation that can survive in this AI changing environment, because there is a variation that is created in the species. Now coming to what happens at the cellular level. So at the cellular level, our body is actually a cell, correct? Inside the cell there is nucleus. Inside the nucleus there is DNA present, which carries our genetic information. So this DNA is actually stored in the form of chromosomes in our body. So these chromosomes replicate themselves and then split. Okay, they make two parts. They make a copy of themselves and split across. And once they have moved to each other, the cytoplasm and everything divides and then becomes two cells. So from one cell, you have become two cells. This process is also called mitosis at a cellular level. And this occurs such that it becomes a two cell from one cell. So the replication of DNA happens using some biochemical changes. If you take up bio in 11th and 12th, you will learn it, and it's the most amazing process. The nucleus, the cytoplasm also replicate, and the new DNA will function in the two cells that are formed. Now coming to the different types of reproduction that we have. So one is the sexual reproduction, one is an asexual reproduction. So in sexual reproduction, there are two parents involved and there is a formation of gametes concept. We will learn what they are slowly when we go to sexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, there is only one parent. With one parent, you make more children and it does not involve any gamete formation. So asexual reproduction as such has like in two types. One is like a very lower level one, which is like in unicellular organisms. And the next one would be in case of a little bit complex multicellular organisms. So the unicellular ones are fission and fragmentation. And the multicellular ones are regeneration, budding, spore formation, and vegetative propagation. We will see each of this slowly. So asexual reproduction, first we are seeing fission. So in fission, mostly we have two types. One is called binary fission, where a cell simply splits into two cells. This happens in amoeba in any plane, and there is another cell called Leishmania, which only splits in one particular direction. Like you can only split it in that way. That is called Leishmania. In one particular orientation, it will split. Multiple fission occurs where one cell divides rapidly to form many daughter cells. In the case of Plasmodium, this occurs. So in the case of Plasmodium, one cell becomes many cells. In binary is two. So one cell becomes two cells. That happens in the case of amoeba. Remember examples of asexual reproduction. That is like the most marks giving thing. So even if you should ideally write the right definition, but writing the example can fetch you full marks. Don't miss out on the examples. Next comes fragmentation, which usually occurs in Spirogyra, where it divides itself into smaller fragments. So the whole cell is divided into smaller fragments, and these fragments become new individuals. Now coming to the bigger one, which is regeneration, little multicellular organism. This is the ability to give rise to a new individual from body parts upon being cut. This occurs in planaria, and you can see even in lizard, if you cut its tail, the body can grow back the tail again. So what happens in planaria is if you cut it in three parts, it will give rise to three different planaria. Coming to the next one, which is budding, which occurs in the case of Hydra. What happens? It's a water plant. It develops a bud on its end, and this bud will grow with the mother for a long time, and then it matures, becomes as big as this Hydra, and then eventually detach and fall off, and it becomes a new individual. This happens in the case of Hydra. Coming to spore formation, which occurs in the case of rhizopus or something like what we see on bread mold. So it's a blob, I didn't write blob. It's a blob and stick-like structure which contains spores which develop into new individual when come in contact with the wet surface. So what happens is it's a blob and there's a stick. So the blob has spores inside which burst open. These things can fly and fall on another wet surface and again grow into new rhizopus. That is a asexual reproduction of spore formation. Now coming to asexual reproduction, which is vegetative propagation. So it is mostly used in plants in which roots, stems, leaves can give rise to new plants, and it is done through layering like this or grafting that you see here. And the advantages of this is mostly used in farming where there is the bearing of fruits and flowers are earlier than those produced through seeds. It helps generate plants which have lost the ability and capacity to produce seeds, and there are genetically similar parent and child. So what happens is, so you get a genetically similar parent and child. Because of this, you can generate the exact copy of the plant. You need not worry about whether it will have exact changes or not. So that happens through banana, orange, sugarcane, rose, jasmine, all are produced through the vegetative propagation that we see. Now coming to sexual reproduction. Now how does it happen at a cellular level? Now we saw that it involves two parents. Now if it involves two parents, how do you manage the number of chromosomes at the end? So if let's say there is a mother and there is a father, and the mother has N chromosomes, the father has N chromosomes, the child will function only if it has N chromosomes. But if you mix the two, if you get two N chromosomes, how will the child function? So this is what is the answer to the question, how is the stability of DNA maintained in sexual reproduction? So what happens is, let us consider the case where the mother and the father. So let's say the mother has 2n sets of chromosomes. We have pairs of chromosomes, right? We have 23 pairs of chromosomes, so total 46 chromosomes. Same way the father also has 2n. So what the mother does, mother will generate a gamete which is of n cells. Now how does this happen is, you have two sets of chromosomes like this, it will split, one will go to one gamete, one will go to one gamete. This process is called meiosis. What we saw earlier is mitosis, where it's replicating and duplicating. Here it is not doing that, it is splitting itself and becoming one each, because when these two meet, then you have 2n cells in the child which is similar to that of a parent, so the species chromosome quantity is maintained. That is why in sexual reproduction there are gametes. Okay, so what happens is, the cells here, as you can see, the cells here have split itself into two. This process is called meiosis, which further generates into gametes which help in reproduction. So the same thing is written here. Human body has 23 pairs of chromosomes, which is 46 sets. So the next generation is done through meiosis. So the gametes or the germ cells have half the set of chromosomes as that of the parent. So if the parent has 46 chromosomes, the gamete will have 23 chromosomes. 123 from the mother, 123 from the father becomes the new child. Even you are made like that. Your 46 also is coming from 23 from your mother and 23 from the father. Right? So now let us look at sexual reproduction in plants. So in plants, what happens is, there are two parts in the plant. So this part that you see, this is called the stamen, that contains anther and filament. This is called the male part of the plant. And this big structure that you see, this is called the pistil, which is the female part. It contains a style, ovary and a stigma on top. And inside the ovary, you can see here, this is the female gamete, okay, that is present. And inside the anther, there are pollen grains which are the male gametes, right? So the male gamete is present inside the anther and the female gamete is present inside the ovary, and this happens in the flower. So your flower is actually a reproductive part of the plant. So inside the flower, what happens is, first, from the anther, the pollen grain falls onto the stigma. Now this process is called pollination, and it can occur multiple ways. From the same flower, in the same anther it can fall, or it can fall from another flower of the same species. So the process of transfer of pollen from anther to the stigma is called pollination. If it comes from the same flower, it is called self-pollination. And if it comes from another flower, it is called cross-pollination. And agents like wind, water, insects, they all help in pollination. Now once the pollen has reached the stigma, it forms a pollen tube, which helps the pollen go into the ovary to reach the egg cell. So this process is called, when the egg cell and the egg cell here and the pollen here meet, it is called fertilization. When the fusion of the male and the female gamete is called fertilization. And once that is formed, the zygote, fused male and female gamete, is called zygote, which becomes the seed of the flower. And this seed is present inside the ovary, which becomes actually a fruit. So it ripens into the fruit. So all our fruits are nothing but the ovaries of the flower. And then this seed, when put inside the soil, like once everything else falls off, that seed, when you put inside the soil, becomes another plant, which is called germination. So after fertilization, the zygote divides rapidly, forms a tough coat to form a seed. The sepals, petals, style, stigma, stamen, everything falls off. The ovary ripens to form a fruit, and under appropriate conditions, the seed will develop and proceed and form a plant, and this is called germination. Now let us move to reproduction in human beings, starting with what are the different changes that occur in human beings towards the process of sexual reproduction. So first, there are some sexual changes that occur. The first thing is appearance of pimples due to oily skin, hair in the genital region, armpits and legs, etc. This happens in both male and female. In boys, certain changes happen. First one is growing of a beard, cracking of voice, etc. Second one is enlarged penis during day or night during daydreams. This occurs, there is an erection in their penis. And in girls, the breast size will increase, it becomes darker, the nipples get darker, the size increases, and there is menstruation or periods around this time, which help in reproduction. So all these changes occur so that reproduction process as such can occur. So now let us look at the male reproductive system. So the male reproductive system consists of a pair of testes, a penis, which is a muscular body, a vas deferens, a seminal vesicle, and a prostrate gland. So all these organs together form the male reproductive system. This testis is present outside a body called scrotum, and the reason for it is the sperm formation, or sperm, which is basically the male gamete, needs lower body temperature than regular body temperature. So that is the reason it is kept outside the body, and this is how sperms are formed. It's called spermatogenesis. And then the sperms are the male gamete. How they look, they have a head and a tail. So this head contains the genetic information or the chromosomes, and the tail is used because the males have to travel to the female gamete. It is used for traveling. Coming to the prostrate gland and the seminal vesicle that is present, the prostrate gland and the seminal vesicle, they release their secretions into the vas deferens as the sperm flows. That is, when the sperm is produced in the testis, it flows through the vas deferens, and once it reaches these, they release some secretions. The uses of this is it nourishes the sperm, keeps it in a fluid consistency to make the transport easier. And the vas deferens merges with the urinary tract to form a urethra, which makes it a common passage for sperms and urine, and both do not happen at the same time. So the female reproductive system consists of a pair of ovaries, fallopian tubes, uterus, cervix, and the vagina, which is the opening. So in a female, a female is born with a set number of eggs in her body at the time of birth. So let's say there are 1,000 eggs. So when she reaches puberty, which is 13-14 years of age, every month the ovary releases one egg in her body. So this egg is released in the ovary. It goes into the fallopian tube. Once here it reaches in the fallopian tube, if there is a sperm present there, a sperm has reached there, it will merge together. The sperm enters into the egg, becomes a zygote, and starts dividing rapidly through the fallopian tube and gets implanted into the uterus, right? So this process of merging of sperm and egg, again merging of female and male gamete, is called fertilization, and the sperms and the egg meet through the fallopian tube. How does it happen? The sperms enter through the vagina, travel across through the uterus, reach the fallopian tube. If there is an egg over there, they merge with the egg. The sperm and the eggs fuse to form zygote, which divides to form a fallopian tube to form an embryo, which then implants into the uterus. Once it's implanted into the uterus, there is a placenta formed. So the placenta that is formed here is a special tissue that is present in the woman's uterus, which helps in nourishing of the baby inside the uterus. So it has villi and lot of blood vessels that help in exchange of oxygen, glucose, and other materials between the baby and the mother. And it takes 9 months for an embryo to develop inside the mother's womb, and then the baby is delivered through muscular contractions in the uterus or through surgery. And let's say if there was no sperm that came, the egg is released but there was no sperm. What happens is the egg is released, there's no sperm. This uterus, in hope that that egg will become a zygote and implant, it nourishes itself with lot of blood here to nurture the embryo, so that there is enough blood to nurture the embryo once it's implanted. But if the embryo is not implanted, there is no fertilization, the egg will fall off in 1 or 2 days, and this thick lining that the uterus has formed, the menstrual blood, will also flow down, and this occurs once a month, which is also called periods or menstruation. The bleeding occurs for 2 to 7 days from woman to woman, and it occurs for between every 28 to 35 days. And this occurs until the woman has eggs in her ovaries, because there are set number of eggs, it releases one every month. So until the set number of eggs are present, it keeps occurring every month. Now, because this sexual act where the penis and the vagina have to meet is a very intimate connection between two bodies. It is also a cause or a reason for diseases to happen, because there is connection between two different organisms. There is naturally a transport of disease. It's like if someone sneezes near you itself, you can catch cold. Imagine someone being that close to you, you will definitely catch diseases if you are not treated or protected well enough. There are a lot of sexually transmitted diseases. So some of them are bacterial, like gonorrhea and syphilis, and there are viral infections like HIV, AIDS, and VATS. So to prevent these diseases, and also dealing with pregnancy is one of the major tasks of a human life, because kids are kids. Ultimately, it is a big responsibility. So to avoid pregnancy as well, there are multiple methods that people follow. So the prevention of pregnancy and STDs is usually done through multiple methods. First one is condoms on the penis, which help as a covering, which prevent the egg and sperm to meet. So the condom is worn on the penis, so the sperm doesn't reach the egg. Next is contraceptive pills, which are taken after the sexual intercourse, and they alter the human hormones by preventing ovulation itself. And since they alter the human hormones, they have lot of side effects in the body. Copper T is used as a loop inside the uterus, which help in preventing the sperm and the egg meet. So it is placed inside the uterus and it prevents the egg and sperm meet. There are surgical methods that are used where there is a vasectomy, where the vas deferens of the male is cut, or the tubectomy, where the fallopian tubes of the female is cut to prevent pregnancy, but it can also cause some side effects because of if the surgery is not done properly. And the last one is abortion, which is used to eliminate the pregnancy. So once the female is pregnant, it can be dissolved using surgery or pills, etc. But previously in the country, in India, it was being misused, aborting all the female children that were present because of the gender disparity in the country. And to prevent this misuse, the prenatal sex determination is prohibited by law in India. So you cannot know the gender of your child before the child is born. This completes the how do organisms reproduce chapter. Next, we move on to the next chapter, which is heredity. This is mostly related to inheritance, etc. And it comes for 3 to 5 marks. And there is a monohybrid cross, a dihybrid cross, and sex determination in human beings, 3 important concepts. This chapter has numericals which are related to some ratios, and you need to practice how you do the crosses in this chapter. This is a very scoring chapter if you understand the cross and understand how it works. So let us see how this goes. So heredity, what it basically means is, it is the transmission of traits from parents. Heredity, that is called heredity. So what is variation in this case? So you have inherited some parts of your mom and dad. You look like your mom a little bit, like your dad a little bit, but you look like yourself also a lot. You don't look exact copies of your parents, because we are not produced by asexual reproduction. There are 2 parents. One, there is a merger of genes. Some parts could be similar, but some part is totally you, which is not found either in your mother or father. So that part is the variation. So this variation can occur. So it's the same deer, but there are multiple variations of the same deer. So that happens because it is a necessary part of evolution. So if there are difference in characteristics among individuals of same species, and it is important because it helps in survival, and this is the basis of evolution, and it helps in adaptation to the new environment. So variation is an important concept. Now let us see how the chromosomes and genes play a role in case of heredity. So chromosomes, as we have seen, is present inside the nucleus. So chromosome is nothing but condensed DNA. DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid, which is present as condensed form in the form of chromosomes. Like you coil it enough to form a chromosomes. A part of this DNA consists of a gene which codes for your everything in the body. Every part of DNA consists of a part of code in terms of 4 letters. The code is in 4 letters. You'll learn more if you take bio in 12th. So the 4-letter code determines everything in your body. Every code, every 3 part of the code becomes a codes for one particular amino acid. Every amino acid chain becomes a protein, and that protein is everything in your body. We are ultimately a bunch of protein. where the liver should be, the size of the liver, how it should be colored, everything is written in the DNA. Just out of curiosity, the 4 letters are GATC. Okay, it's combination of these letters in multiple fashions, which can cause, you will learn more in 12th if you take up bio, right? So this is one of the most interesting topics to learn. It's beyond just pea plants, trust me, it's very interesting. So the DNA is a compressed nucleus which is responsible for creation of body structure, its characteristics, and the DNA consists of genes which code for a particular protein to build your body. So any alteration in that gene, like let's say if in that place, for example, it has to be GAT, actually T becomes U actually. So if it has to be GAU, but in that place if it is GAA, completely different protein is created. Just a letter change and a different protein is created. So any alteration in the gene would result in change of the protein, and it would make an organism very different from the other organism. So that is how the genetic disorders happen, where there is a little change in the DNA and there is a genetic disorder in the person. So these are how chromosomes and genes carry forward to the next generation. So now we have different kinds of traits. One is an inherited trait and next is an acquired trait. Inherited traits are the traits that are passed from parents to offspring. Like your eye color. Let's say in your family no one has blue eyes. There is no chance of you getting blue eyes. It is as simple as that. So the trait is passed on from parents to offspring. Acquired traits are traits you acquire as you start living, like traits that are learned during the life of the individual, like bodybuilding, driving, swimming. All these things you have learned through the process of life. So they are not just because you swim, it doesn't mean your child would swim. It's a trait which is acquired during life. But if you have black eyes, black color eyeballs, it's very much possible that your child might have, because that's an inherited. Coming to dominant and recessive traits. So dominant traits are traits that are more expressed than the other, and it is represented by 2 capital letters. That's just a representation. Like curly hair is more dominant than straight hair. To give you a better understanding of this, what it ultimately means is, if your father has curly hair and your mother has straight hair, the likelihood of you having curly hair is more. That is what it essentially means, because dominant trait is curly hair. It is dominant over the straight hair. There is no equality there. One is dominant, one is recessive. So the dominant one has more chance of showing up than the recessive one. So the recessive trait is less expressed, or it is recessive over the other. It is represented by 2 small letters. Why am I saying two letters everywhere? I will explain that in a short bit time. And it's a straight hair is recessive over curly hair. So why there are two letters everywhere is, let's say I'm a dominant trait of curly hair. So I represent it by 2 capital C. So this 1 capital C is coming from one of that parent's parent. How is this child made? Out of 2 parents only? No, one is coming from the other parent. As simple as that. So there are 2, as in the 2 sets of chromosomes, 23 pairs. So one is same, the other one is also same. So one is coming from one parent, one is coming from the other parent. So let's say there is a recessive trait. So this is a small c, I'll write small c like this. So one parent also had straight hair, the other parent also had straight hair. That's why this lady had straight hair. So that is how you represent recessive traits. So now coming to the monohybrid cross done by Mendel. Where what Mendel did, he wanted to find out what happens if I start mixing up things. That is what he exactly did. He wanted to see how traits follow. Okay, so instead of keeping everything in the same species, he merged 2 different kinds of traits to see how traits are expressed. So what he do, he took a pure tall plant and a pure short plant. Now in this case of genetics, what we mean by pure or homogeneous is 2 capital T's. When 2, I said 1 coming from the father, 1 coming from the mother. Correct? So that means this is so tall, it is so purely tall that the parents were also tall of this plant. The parent of this plant were also tall. That is why it has 2 capital T's. Pure short plant. Again, the 2 parents of this plant were also short. That is why it is short. It is obviously short. 2 parents are tall, short, it is short. Same way. So both the parents are tall, both the parents are, so that's what we mean by pure tall or pure short, or in genetic terms, homogeneous tall or homogeneous short plant. So once these two plants are crossed between each other, let's say I try to make them have babies in one sense. So what happens is, Mendel thought that he will get all kinds of plants, but he ended up getting all tall plants. So now if you look at it, this one is tall and there is one short gene also in this, but still it is looking tall. Why? Because tall is dominant over the short. So internally, even if I have one short gene, I'll still look tall because tall is dominant over the short. My mom's short is suppressed over the dad's tall. Dad is tall, so finally I am tall. Right? So F1 generation, we got all tall. F1 as in first generation. We got all tall plants. So Mendel was not satisfied here. He is wondering why the short plant never appeared in the first place. He wanted to know what happened. So what he did, he took the two plants of this F1 generation, which are not purely tall. They're looking tall. There is some short gene inside them, and they have been crossed or selfed with each other. In that case, what happened is, this guy got 3 tall plants and 1 short plant. He was confused what happened. So he took the genetics of this. He discovered that one of them was pure tall, 2 of them were heterogeneous tall, looking tall but genetically not purely tall, and 1 short plant. Then he started trying to draw the genetic nature of this and gave the law of dominance. He said in a particular characteristic such as height of the plant, there is one dominant trait which is expressed in the F1 generation, and the other trait is called the recessive trait. So one trait which comes in the F1 generation, the first generation, what trait you see, that is a dominant trait. So if this is asked in boards multiple times, he will not explicitly tell you what is dominant, what is recessive. He will just say a violet flower and a white flower were crossed and the F1 generation had all violet flowers. So that is an inference that you draw using the law of dominance, that in the F1 generation, if all were violet, violet is dominant over the white. Similarly, tall is dominant over the short. That is your law of dominance. In a characteristic, there is one trait which is expressed in the F1 generation, which is the dominant trait, and the other one is recessive. So let us see genetically what happens. So first, he took a pure tall plant. So genetically, it is this. Now it's a sexual reproduction. So there is gametes. So one is capital T and then there is small t. And then these two are crossed to form all tall plant. Like I said, these two T's coming from 2 parents. So here again, the 2 parents, one parent is tall, one parent is short. Even though it is capital T, small t, all are tall because tall is dominant, right? So, and then what he did, he took this one and crossed it across. Again, gametes, 2 possible gametes. Here I have drawn only one because there is only one. The other one also will be capital T. So here there are 2 possible gametes. One is capital T, one is small t. Capital T, small t. Now, the possibilities that can come are, if this T merges with this T, you get a pure tall plant. Capital T, small t, looking tall plant. Small t, capital T, looking tall plant, and the small t and small t give rise to a short plant. Now, this thing in genetics is drawn using a Punnett square, where you put the gametes on the ends and you merge it accordingly. This is called a Punnett square, discovered by the scientist Punnett. So now we can write a phenotypic ratio. What is phenotypic ratio? How do they look? When I look, how do I look? How do I see them? So there's only one characteristic here, which is tall and short. So how many tall, how many short ratio? So the tall ratio is 3:1. There were 3 tall plants and 1 short plants. Even if you see here, this is tall, this is tall, this is tall. So 3 tall plants and 1 short plant. Next comes the genotypic ratio. That is, in terms of genetics, how are they? So in genotypic ratio, there are 3 possible types of genes that are possible. Pure tall, mixed tall or heterogeneous tall, and a short tall. So that is 1:2:1. So 1 pure tall, 2 heterogeneous tall and 1 short plant. That is what you have got in your monohybrid cross. Now coming to Mendel, who had no other better job at that point, he tried to do 2 dihybrid cross. Instead of just taking tall short, he decided to go with 2 characteristics. Rather than tall short, let me see if just because it is tall, will it be also white flower, something like that. So what he did is he took round and yellow seed and wrinkled and green seed of pea plant. What he did was, now you should understand that it's a round and yellow seed. Round is the shape and yellow is the color. So he's judging 2 characteristics, color and shape of the seed. So he took a pure round and yellow. Again, both parents are round, both parents are yellow. Round and wrinkled and green seed, both parents are wrinkled, both parents are green. So now again he's trying to see, just because if it is round, will it be yellow? Or just because if it is yellow, will it be round? He wants to see the dependence of traits across each other. So like, just because if you have curly hair, will you have a round face? It is something like checking like that, but that is not true. So now the gametes that will be formed in this case would be RY and RY and RY and RY's capital and small respectively. Both the traits, you have to, each gamete will carry all traits ka gametes, right? So if this, so one, if it will not just be round yellow, it will not be, what I'm trying to say here is, it will not be R and Y. Why will it not be R and Y? Because a child cannot just adhere to one particular characteristic. Both characteristics have to come to the child. It has to be shape also, color also has to be determined. So the genes will be both in the case. So it will always carry both characteristic genes in one particular gamete. To be precise, in the human being's gamete, it is carrying the genes of so many traits at once, correct? So every gamete will carry information of all the characteristics at once. So just because it won't be divided into 2 particular cases. So again, what happened? He merged, he got one yellow round seed, same concept, genetically looking different, but looks round and yellow. It's like law of dominance is proved. So the second step, F1 generation, selfing. So he takes the 2 round yellow seeds and he then makes the gametes of this. Now this gamete making is what the law is. So now here there are 4 possible gametes that can form. Remember that in a gamete, both characteristic trait has to be involved. It could be round yellow or it could be round wrinkled, round and green, or this or that. But both characteristics should be present when you do the gamete. That is what you need to learn. So here if I write the first gamete, what happens is I have RY, which is, I'm expressing both the characteristics, correct? Round also, yellow also. One gamete is expressing round and green. Okay, possible. But both have to be present. So what are all the 4 possibilities that are present? All the 4 possibilities are here, right? So you are doing round yellow, round green, wrinkled yellow and wrinkled and green. So you get all the characteristics in the gametes which we are trying to observe and we are trying to see. So this is what was law of independent assortment. Each characteristic is independent of each other. No characteristic influences the other. Same logic. Just because someone has curly hair, it is not rule that they will have round face. Similarly, just because it is round, it doesn't mean it will be yellow. That is why you have these 2 gametes, right? Where it is round and green and wrinkled and yellow. Why? Because it is not dependent. Yellow will not only go where there is round. It will go to the other case also. And they are acquired independently as per the law of dominance. As per the law of dominance that goes, whichever is dominant, that will be acquired by the next one. So finally, when you do the Punnett square of all these gametes here, this is how your offsprings would look. This is a possibility. You should understand, in the Punnett square, there is a possibility of having this child, this child, this child, this child, like that. How many of our children you have based on how it is possible. So the ratio is basically trying to say, in the previous one, when you say 3:1, you are saying the probability of having tall kids is 3 times more than short kids. That is what you are trying to say. Similarly, here, if you write the phenotypic ratio, round to yellow, round to green, wrinkled to yellow to wrinkled green, you are saying the possibility of having round green is 9 times more more than the possibility of having green kids, or then the possibility of having the other kids. So that is what the 9:3:3:1 ratio means. Now coming to the sex determination of human beings. So in sex determination of human beings, what we learn is the chromosomes. Like I said, every human body has 23 pairs of chromosomes, right? The first chromosome has 2 chromosomes, like that. But in human beings, the male has an XY chromosome. It is different than each other, right? The first and the next one is not the same as each other. And in the female, it is XX. The 2 chromosomes are X and X. So how is the child, the baby inside, how do you know what gender will it be? So the sex here means gender of the child. How is it determined in human beings? So what happens is, the male, which has the XY chromosome, has 2 gametes, X and Y. The female, which has XX chromosome, has 2 gametes, XX. So if the X and the Y from the father merge together, you get a male child or the boy child. And if the X from the female and the X from the male merge together, you get the female child, which is similar to XX. This is how the gender is determined in case of human beings. So the father actually has the gender of the child, and to be very precise, it is not even in his control. How will he know which gamete will mate with which egg, right? So it is just a 50-50% probability to either have a girl child or a boy child. Okay, so this completes the heredity chapter. Remember to practice crosses, the dihybrid and monohybrid. It comes with practice. Without practice, it will not come. There will be questions on ratios, previous year questions. You can also get it from the sample paper that will come in the link if you comment below, or you can try and solve previous year questions. That helps you accustom to that kind of questions. Moving on to our last chapter in bio, which is our environment. This chapter is very simple chapter. It carries just 3 to 5 marks of weightage, sometimes just 3 marks. And the most repeated one are food chain or the 10% law, sometimes the ozone layer questions. How to study, practice the food energy calculations, make notes of it, or prepare for MCQs in this chapter. Like always, suggest you to make your own notes. Otherwise, you can always comment below and collect the notes of every chapter of bio from the link that will be present. Coming to the major ecosystem that we studied, there are 2 kinds of ecosystems, natural ecosystem and man-made ecosystems. So all the living and the non-living organisms of an area comprise to form an ecosystem, right? So everything living and non-living in an area forms its own ecosystem. So natural ecosystems are formed naturally over time, like forests, ponds, lakes, and man-made ecosystems are made by man. Like the garden in your house alone is an ecosystem in itself. They all interact with each other. The weather, the temperature there matters to the organism. So now next one is the components of ecosystem, where there are biotic components and abiotic components. Biotic components are all the living components of the ecosystem, like the plants, animals, insects, bacteria, etc. Abiotic components are the non-living components of the ecosystem, like wind, soil, temperature, rainfall. All of these things that affect the biotic systems are called the abiotic components of the ecosystem. Next, we have classification of organisms, where each organism is classified differently in the ecosystem. First, we have producers, then we have consumers, and then we have decomposers. So the producers produce energy through photosynthesis. So most of the energy is produced by autotrophic plants, which are the producers in the nature. Consumers are again of 2 types, herbivores and carnivores. Herbivores consume energy from the autotrophic plants by eating grass, like deer, giraffe, etc. Carnivores consume the herbivores, and they are the flesh-eating animals like lion, tiger, etc. So to take energy, they eat the herbivore plants. Once the carnivores are done, they are done with their life, they are decomposed back into the soil with the help of decomposers. They consume energy after the death of the plant by pushing the energy into the soil, like the earthworms, etc. So now there are multiple trophic levels in a ecosystem. So the first trophic level is the grass, which is basically an autotrophic plant, which are producers, and then there are insects or consumers, which are herbivorous, and then comes, so this basically are called primary consumers, and then there are secondary consumers in the tropic level. So the energy as we go up this pyramid is less. So the number of organisms down are more than the number of organisms above. So every tropic level reduces the number of organisms that it has. Now, what is a food chain? A food chain is organisms form a food chain who can, on basis of who consumes whom, and complete the cycle of energy flow in the ecosystem. Like the water and the grass is consumed by the rabbit and the mouse, and the fox or the snake eats this, then the eagle eats this, and then again is decomposed by the decomposers. So this is a food chain which completes the cycle, and a food web is this because this can be eaten by this also, and the if the mouse dies before everything else consumes it, it will be decomposed, right? So it is multiple food chain interconnected with each other, and it's a more stable system where, because each organisms has more options of energy in case of a food web. So let us see how the energy flow happens in a food chain. So if the sun has, let's say, 1 lakh joules of energy, only 1% of the sun's energy is converted into its glucose by the green plants. So out of the entire sun rays that form, only 1% is converted by the plants. From here, it follows a 10% law where 10% is passed on from this to the next gen. So if this has 1000 from the sun, which had 1 lakh, the next deer, while it consumes, gets 100 joules of energy by eating this grass. And then if a tiger eats this deer, it cuts only 10 joules of energy, which is 10% of that 100 joules. Where is the remaining energy going? It is going out in terms of carrying it out its regular life processes, right? So you need energy to consume yourself and maintain your body, etc. So only 10% of energy is left for the next tropic level. So due to this energy left in the end of the food chain, there are only 3-4 steps in a food chain, and after every 10, there is no energy left for someone who is eating the tiger in this case, correct? It is just decomposed back into the soil. So now coming to biomagnification, here what happens is pesticides that are present enter into the system at lowest tropic level, which is grass or plants. Since they are not biodegradable, they don't get released in that energy which is getting lost in the 10% rule. They get accumulated each level and are found in highest concentration at highest tropic levels. Okay, so what happens is this process is called biomagnification, where it goes to the highest tropic level and it stays there because of that kind of energy. Coming to the ozone layer is a deadly poisonous gas which protects the earth from harmful UV rays, and it can cause skin cancer. So what happens is the oxygen in the presence of UV rays splits into 2 oxygen molecules, and this one oxygen merges with the remaining oxygen to produce O3, which is ozone. But it also protects us from harmful UV rays. So lately what has been happening is, because of the use of chlorofluorocarbons, it is depleting this ozone layer from the earth, which is resulting in higher temperatures in the earth, and which is causing the global warming, rise in sea level, and all the environmental issues. Hence, the use of CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons has been banned. Usually, these CFCs were used in refrigerators and air conditioners. Now they are made without this CFC gas. Coming to biodegradable and non-biodegradable waste, where waste disposal is one of the most important aspects of protecting the environment. So biodegradable waste are waste which can be decomposed by nature, and they are mostly like your food waste and everything which is occurring in nature. Non-biodegradable waste are waste which cannot be decomposed by nature over time. It like plastics, etc. They cannot be decomposed. And this becomes, so this completes the entire syllabus of your bio, and you have successfully spent a good amount of time in revising the entire bio chapter, but this 1.5 hour of revision would really fetch you 40 to 30 marks. Hope this video was helpful. You can comment below for notes of all the chapters along with some sample papers and diagram practice worksheets. or you can join our WhatsApp group where we share all this information and share an MCQ question every day to practice. Let me know again in comments below if you would like to watch a video similarly like this, a revision video for physics, and if you would like for me to solve any numericals in physics or bio, do a video on that, and we could complete that in the next videos. Until then, hope your concepts get you to grades and keep studying well. All the best for your 10th board exams.